Any question? Any questions for Jaime before we go on to our second presenter? I have a question, but I'll see if there's anything from the floor first. Wait. Not seeing goal. I'm going to ask this question, or maybe if you could say a little bit about PREPA. I was talking to, my day job is working with a nonprofit quarterly, and my editor-in-chief is Puerto Rico. So, you know, her father grew up in Luisa. And she talks about PREPA as being this really critical institution, you know, that
yes,
in some ways defined the island, you know, and so give a little bit more background for folks so that there's like this understanding of what's happening.
PREPA started like 100 years ago. At the beginning, when the electrification of Puerto Rico started, we have like a small private company that started generating and transmitting electricity around the island. But after the Great Depression in the island, there was the government buy off all those private companies and unify as one public corporation to provide an electrified energy Puerto Rico, all the world, as a strategic for economic development. And after many years, there was PREPA successfully. I'm right now in the middle of the island in Puerto Rico, in Morovis, Puerto Rico. And you have electrification in every remote town of the island. And that was an achievement of PREPA. But with the government intervention, the politics, and putting people in position that doesn't have the qualification or doesn't have the capacity to contribute to the company, and some corruption in the way, lead that a monopoly is bankrupt. And it's hard. You are a monopoly. You have the whole business just for you. How you can bankrupt after that? And that happened in the island. And after Maria, what happened is that monopoly that doesn't have capacity of economic capacity to rebuild itself, it no longer can exist. And it's hard for me in my family part because I have family that work in PREPA and now have to work in other place because of the privatization. But many years ago, we talked to the union and said, you should create a workers' co-op because you have the knowledge, you know all the lines, all the substations of the big station, the production. You should make a workers' co-op and offer that instead of the corporation of the government manage that entity. But Maria destroyed the system. The only way to rehabilitate the system is with the capital that the government of the United States, after disaster through FEMA, gonna rebuild the system. But with the privatization, that disaster opened the opportunity for creation electric cooperatives. And in the middle of that chaos is the opportunity. And you have to see disaster in two ways. You can say this is a disaster, nothing can be done, or you see as an opportunity. Because before that, we cannot create electric cooperative because it's a monopoly from the government. But now is the opportunity. Do the people get engaged, get the knowledge about electric cooperative, get together, and the communities and workers' co-op like REM co-op that Gilberto is going to talk about, is the opportunity to the people take advantage and take the power in their own hands instead of leaving some external forces that dictate this. And that in Puerto Rico gonna have two big transformations at the same time. One is a transformation of the electric system from a monopoly from the government to a privatization sector. But also it's in the middle of the transformation of energy in Puerto Rico because I don't know how you say in English, la política de transformación energética.
The energy transformation policy.
That's correct. That probably Mr. Licenciado Nieves is going to talk about. said that in 2025, 40% of the energy generated in Puerto Rico have to be renewable. And for the 2050, have to be 100% renewable. And if you see the electric cooperative in the state, many of them are fossil fuel electric cooperatives. But in Puerto Rico, we have to reconstruct the whole system, but change it to a renewable energy at the same time. And that opened a substantially big opportunities that Dr. Guevara going to talk about, and Licenciado Norberto Jose Luis Nieve going to talk about more. But it's a history change. And we just in the pinnacle moment of that big changes at the same time.
Great, thanks. Ramon, do you want to start and let Michael know when you want to run the video?
Is it my turn?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, thanks to Ace for inviting me to provide some comments about Puerto Rico's energy sector, particularly the new concept of electric.
Ramon, do you want to do the video first, or do you want to talk first?
Yeah, let me introduce to you former Senator Eduardo Batia, who couldn't be with us today. So let's hear a few words from Batia.
Uh-oh.
If we can.
Sorry, I forgot. I know that when you share the screen, you just need to make sure that everyone can hear the audio.
That's right.
And so I forgot that.
All right.
Don't worry. And let me say in this moment that having all this information in the middle of pandemic is another opportunity.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's like a perfect storm altogether, but it's the big opportunity that we have right now, and I think you all know see about it.
All right. See if this
Ready?
works. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't hear it.
Yeah, no, I send you.
You don't hear it?
No.
No.
You try.
Just 1 second.
Third time the charm, right?
Yeah.
La tercera la buena.
Ajá. La tercera es la vencida. I just want to publicly give thanks to Jose Luis Nieve because he was instrumental in creating this law for electric co-ops. Thank you, Ramon Luis.
Thank you.
Okay. No?
No.
Why don't you give me a few minutes, Ramon?
Okay.
And I will work on that.
All right. So you've been introduced. Go ahead.
Okay, so in a few minutes, we hope to hear from former Senator and former President of the Senate, Eduardo Batia. Thanks to Ace for inviting us to discuss electric co-ops in Puerto Rico. First, let me say, and Jaime had an introduction about PREPA, and this is very important. We cannot discuss the electric co-ops in Puerto Rico without discussing the current status of PREPA and where we are right now. As Jaime was saying, before PREPA was created, and the name of it is very important. PREPA was created in 1941 as a public corporation owned by the people of Puerto Rico, by the government of Puerto Rico. Before 1941, we had in Puerto Rico private electric systems to generate and distribute energy, and also public systems, mostly hydroelectric systems created by the government of the United States. In 1941, the Puerto Rico Water Resources Authority was created. Oh, there's some, okay. The Puerto Rico Water Resources Authority was created, and the name is very important because what we had in 1941 mostly were government-owned generators in dams. We had we depended on hydroelectric for power generation. This is very important. It is also significant that in 1979, the government passed a law, that's Act 57 of 1979, changing the name from Puerto Rico Water Resources Authority to the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. Why? Because by 1971, we had abandoned hydroelectric as the main source of power generation in Puerto Rico, which is a sad fact, looking back, obviously, and looking now where we are right today. PREPA, in 40 years, was achieved, had great achievements. The first achievement, as Jaime was mentioning, is that PREPA got to distribute electricity to all of the island of Puerto Rico, even the most remote sectors and poorest sectors of Puerto Rico. That's a social justice achievement, and we must be clear about it. PREPA did great in 40 years. It did that, and also in 40 years, PREPA consolidated energy, power generation, electric distribution, transmission, and customer service. In 1981, PREPA acquired the last system that was not part of PREPA in the town of Cayey, and with that, it created the monopoly that we have right now. However, after having achieved so much for the people of Puerto Rico, PREPA turned into a bloated, bureaucratic, politicized public corporation that became one of the main obstacles for instance, renewable energy in Puerto Rico. There were corrupt practices there. Their plants were some of the most contaminating plants according to the EPA in the United States. PREPA also became its own political power. You know that we have three branches of government in U.S. Republican systems, with the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Well, in Puerto Rico, we also have PREPA as a branch of political power on its own. And I know for a fact, and Senator Batia knows for a fact, the huge political power of PREPA and the company mentality of its employees. They are company men and women that for generations are very loyal to PREPA and very protective, which is a good thing on one hand, but on the other hand, PREPA became very opposed to change. In 2013, Senator Batia convened a public hearing to discuss what turned out to be PREPA's last bond issue of $673 million. PREPA did not consult the legislature when going to the bond market to borrow money. But since that was happening for the first time in history, the Senate of Puerto Rico called PREPA to try to justify their bond issue. And the fact of the matter was that we became convinced that PREPA was lying regarding what they were going to use the money for, and the reason why they were doing the bond issue. PREPA was supposed to invest the monies obtained from bond issues according to their 1974 trust agreement in maintenance and their infrastructure, the operations, the electric infrastructure. But instead, they were just using the Visa to pay the MasterCard for years and years. Mm-hmm. And that's why PREPA became bankrupt. Well, first insolvent in 2014, and then Congress had to create a law, the Promesa Act, to allow PREPA to go into a bankruptcy type proceeding in 2017. However, in the middle of all this, and we decided to start a process of transformation of energy reform in PREPA in 2013. So Senator Batia filed several bills, and I had the honor to serve back then as chairman of the Energy Committee of the Senate. And between Batia and myself, we got to create the first energy reform acts over PREPA and the energy sector. And the cornerstone of those reforms was the creation of what we know now as PREP, the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau, back then called the Energy Commission. The PREPA, and this is what I'm going to mention, is insane. One of the mistakes that we made back in 1941 was creating electric utility with no regulator, with no regulatory authority whatsoever over it. That was the biggest mistake that we did back in 1941. PREPA was officially self-regulated with its own governing board composed of political appointees from the governor. There was no way that there was going to be effective oversight over PREPA. That's why when we were in the process of creating the energy regulator, we got the big protest from the unions, from PREPA's workers, and because they were saying, "Oh, you're going to privatize PREPA." No, we were not going to privatize PREPA. What we were doing is to transform its governance as a public utility. Sadly enough, that opposition, based on lies, on disinformation, saying that we were going to privatize, sadly, ironically, paved the way for the real privatizers, the party that wanted to privatize PREPA, to do just that.
Ramon, we do have the video ready, so when you want to break, let me know.
Okay.
We can try it.
We're going to introduce Batia, but I would like to several seconds after Batia speaks to talk a little bit about Act 258 of 2018, which authorized electric co-ops in Puerto Rico. But now we have Senator Batia.
Okay, let's see if this works.
It'll work this time. Can everyone see?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Eduardo Batia. I am a former state senator, former president of the Senate of Puerto Rico, and it has been a great honor for me to serve the island and to focus on the issue of energy. So let me thank the Co-op Education Association. Let me thank Steve. Gracias, Steve. Let me also thank Jaime Cuevas, who's our representative, our Puerto Rico representative, and so many others who have put this panel together. Unfortunately, I cannot join you today. I would have loved to be part of this panel and hear your questions, but unfortunately I cannot be there. However, for many of you, Puerto Rico is a new subject. What does Puerto Rico have to do with energy co-ops? And the real answer about 10 years ago was nothing. We had, and this is something, there are three things I would say that you need to know about Puerto Rico. One, we had for almost 100 years a very centralized energy system where the state, Puerto Rico as a government, owned 100% of the utility. Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority was 100% owned by the state. And for 90, almost 100 years, it provided all the services that Puerto Rico needed. As many state-owned monopolies, it went through ups and downs. It had its good days and its bad days. And unfortunately, the last few years, they've had really bad days, bad weeks, bad years. They got themselves involved in many inefficiencies. They became a bloated bureaucracy. Unfortunately, they borrowed and borrowed and borrowed to the point where the company had to file for bankruptcy in 2017. But the issue we realized that the issue offered itself an opportunity to think about the future. What are the options for Puerto Rico? Well, the first thing we did in 2014 was create a regulator. Puerto Rico never had a utility regulator, and that's important because if you want to compete in an open market, you have to make sure that you have a regulator to basically look at the players as a referee and make sure that there's a level playing field for everybody. So we started in 2014 a movement, A, to regulate Puerto Rico for the first time, B, to move towards renewable energy, and C, to open the market, make sure that Puerto Rico's energy company did not have a monopoly. being a bankrupt company, we decided, why don't we basically open the market to new companies? So a number of co-ops in 2015, 16, and early 17 said, we would be interested, just like it happens everywhere in the world, that energy co-ops are part of the industry, are part of the community. In Puerto Rico, that was not the case. So the question then became, how do we do it? So boom, in 2018, and this is the second thought I think it's important for all of you, A, we had a monopoly, that's number one. B, we opened the market up. And we created for the first time a law, it's Law 258 of 2018 in Puerto Rico, that opens up the market for energy co-ops. It creates an opportunity, it creates a legal framework for energy co-ops to flourish, to be born and flourish in Puerto Rico. And that gave us an opportunity then to reach out to so many groups throughout the island and outside of Puerto Rico. And I would like to thank Nareka, that has been hand in hand working with so many local companies and local co-ops to make sure that they have the technical background to actually move forward. Jaime Cuevas has been instrumental in this, and attorney Ramon Luis Nieves, who will be speaking after I'm done, has been registering energy co-ops and sort of doing the baby steps necessary to enter into this important market in Puerto Rico. But we didn't stop there. 2019, and it's the third part of this message, 2019, we approved legislation in Puerto Rico mandating 100% renewable energy by the year 2050, 40% by the year 2025. Just to give you an idea, we have only 2% renewable energy, 2% right now in Puerto Rico, which means there's a lot of room for new companies, a lot of room for innovation, a lot of mandated room for the transition away from fossil fuels. So we all think that this is a great opportunity for emerging co-ops, energy co-ops to work in Puerto Rico, for emerging co-ops to organize themselves in Puerto Rico, for communities to have microgrids. And part of the law of 2019 also creates the first microgrid regulation. We have basically covered all of the necessary legislation to basically give an opportunity to all the communities in Puerto Rico that want to organize themselves as a co-op to do it. Now, the question is, who will take the first step? The answer is already about 3 or 4 energy co-ops have registered themselves in our Department of State, which means they're already doing the steps. One of them in Caguas, Pirucho Co-op, has already started working. There are 2 up in the mountains. There's another one in San Juan, I understand. So we are basically moving in that direction, and there's a lot of room to grow for those who are interested in developing a market and being part of an emerging co-op energy market in Puerto Rico. Again, I'm sorry I cannot join you. I cannot be there personally. I'm very excited about the future. I think Puerto Rico's energy market with many co-ops will create the necessary framework for great successes in the future. I think we have all of the elements. We have plenty of sun, plenty of good people, plenty of good clients, plenty of good members, and a very strong co-op movement on the island that can actually participate directly with creating the framework, creating the environment for more co-ops to flourish on the island. So again, let me introduce you to Ramon Luis Nieves. He will be taking your questions. He has worked very closely in registering and incorporating energy co-ops in Puerto Rico. And let me wish all of you the best, and with the great hope that one day I will welcome you in the beautiful island of Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Ramon, I know you wanted to say a couple more words about the co-op,
Yes.
so go ahead.
Yes. First of all, in 2018, as was mentioned, Senator Batia was in the Senate. I was an advisor to Senator Batia. So with between Senator Batia and Senator Larry Selhammer, we worked together to put together a bill to authorize electric co-ops in Puerto Rico for the first time in history. Although we have a strong cooperative movement from the trade unions mostly in Puerto Rico, it's a very strong sector, but we didn't have the experience of electric cooperatives in Puerto Rico. So what we did essentially was create a new chapter in the great co-op law that we have. That's Act 239 of 2004, which is the general cooperative law. We create a chapter to authorize electric co-ops. So the concept is basically that electric co-ops, if a group of people want to create an electric co-op, they have to go through the process of that is prescribed in the law for any kind of cooperative. But also, we gave a role to the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau, basically on the most technical issues of if you are going to do a co-op on a microgrid, so you have to comply with the microgrid regulation, for instance. The Puerto Rico Energy Bureau also created a regulation as ordered by Act 258. That's Regulation 9117 on electric co-ops. Right now, we slowly but surely, there are groups that have gotten together to create electric co-ops. Eduardo Batia mentioned the first fully authorized co-op, which is called Pirucho Co-op, that's Cooperativa San Salvador, in the town of Caguas. They have their first cooperative. It's just between 8 and 10 homes, but they're expecting to grow. They were fully recognized as a co-op by the Energy Bureau. We also have the Cooperativa Hidroeléctrica de la Montaña, which was the first real co-op that was authorized by law. So according to the complying with the law before the regulation was done. It is interesting to know the fact that Cooperativa Hidroeléctrica de la Montaña has been challenging some aspects of the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau's regulation. And I know the lawyer, he's a great friend of mine. It is me. Because interestingly enough, the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau went a little bit far from what they had to regulate. And now if you want to organize a co-op, electric co-op, you have to go before them and to organize the basic documents of a cooperative. And after they pass judgment, then you have to go to the commission that really is the one empowered to help groups organize cooperatives. We're saying that that's not according to the law, but the courts will decide. But there are other groups that are starting to get interested in creating electric co-ops. And just to wrap up, I guess Jaime was saying, and this is very true. Although electric co-ops in the U.S. are mostly based on fossil fuels, the whole legislative intent of our electric co-op law is to get those electric co-ops to become based on renewables. And after Maria, there has been a lot of interest in helping empower communities. So we understand that electric co-ops could be key to creating regional or local cooperatives that deal with renewable power, solar powered microgrids, for instance. And we have a great opportunity, and the current energy policy of Puerto Rico mandates that we incorporate electric co-ops and cooperative microgrids into the energy sector of Puerto Rico. So I look forward to your comments and questions.
Great. Well, there's a question from the audience. I'm going to ask this, and then I'm going to pass it to Gilberto after that. But this is from Margaret Bow at USDA in the chat. So she was asking, I believe there will be multiple co-ops, but she asked how many, if there will, and what are their forms. So most of the electric co-ops, the traditional electric co-ops in the U.S. are nonprofit consumer co-ops. On the other hand, renewable energy co-ops are often worker co-ops in the United States, like Namaste Solar in Colorado, for example. And then there's things called multi-stakeholder co-ops where you have both consumer and worker represented. So what types of co-ops are we talking about?
Well, I guess in the first stages of the development of electric co-ops in Puerto Rico, we'll see local community control systems, mostly solar based, to attend to resiliency issues in communities. But
I mean, like, are the owners consumers, or are the owners the workers themselves? Who are the, how is that structured?
yes, these cooperatives are owned by the consumers. So once you agree to receive electricity from the co-op, you become one of the owners of the co-op.
Got it. Thanks. There'll be more time for questions at the end too, but I want to pass it on, I think, to Gilberto to get you in the conversation. Michael, if you can get the slides ready for Gilberto, I know he has those.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks to this audience. I will use the slides just to guide this talk, very informal, but I thought it would be appropriate to take you back to the days of Maria. I'm going to remain quiet for the presentation of the simulation. What the simulation is about is for you to see and to visualize and to feel what it felt like for us in Puerto Rico to be without electricity since September 17th, actually 18th, when we woke up having experienced Maria, until a year or more later. So let's look at the simulation. Michael, if you please. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. As you've seen, the slow progress in turning electricity on in Puerto Rico way up until May 5th, and this was put together by the U.S. Corps of Engineers. It left many places, many island residents without power well beyond this date. The Harvard study that was conducted many months after Maria to validate the number of deaths, because the official claim was that there had been only 6 deaths, was able to document over 2,500 deaths as a result of Maria. Obviously not from drowning, but from the lack of electricity. People that depended on life-saving medications that went bad, spoiled, or with life-sustaining machines. So we can argue what is the best or the most demanding of services, or what is the most appropriate or most required service that we can depend or demand. And for us, it's electricity. Obviously, economic development depends on it. Let's go to the next slide, Michael, if you please. So I'll address these 4 points in my talk with you. One is, and as we have begun this walk towards electric cooperatives, is to share with you the easiness of the regulatory process. A regulatory process that, as you've heard from Senator Batia and former Senator Ramon Luis Nieves, is maturing. And it's slow in maturing, but we're getting there. I'll also talk about some of the business opportunities for a workers' co-op, that is REM co-op, Renewable Energy Management Co-op. We are a workers' co-op, and there is another co-op that was formed of linemen that are working and fixing all of the transmission and the distribution lines in Puerto Rico. But by and large, Steve, to add to the earlier explanation, most of the electric co-ops tend to be consumer co-ops, and many that will be formed will be consumer co-ops. So I'll talk about the business opportunities in terms of the generation, the transmission, the distribution, and the servicing, which are the 4 key elements in all of this electric discussion. For us, it's also about, from the business side, the aggregation, the wheeling, the financing, the renewable energy credits, and the ITCs, the investment tax credits we need to look at. I'll talk about the arbitrage opportunities. This is where we actually have a business model that we can develop. How do we align this new emergent industry, energy, power into the co-op movement? There are 47 different types of cooperatives. To give you an example, one of those types of cooperatives in Puerto Rico is the Savings and Loans Cooperative. The Savings and Loans Cooperatives are about 114 of those, so they have an incredible footprint. They cover the entire island. Their membership alone is well over 1 million members. And if you consider who can join a cooperative, although there are laws that allow for young kids to join cooperatives on an early stage, most of that million membership are from actually the producers and the supporters of this economy. In assets, the cooperative movement in the SNLs alone manages over $8 billion worth of assets. So in arbitrage, I'll also talk about the NRECA, and we began to hear, and I'm glad, Steve, that you've mentioned some of the cooperatives, worker cooperatives in the states that are working in alternative energy. We need to have a conversation to begin to identify those, because by and large, when we've been to the NRECA convention and have been talking with many of the NRECA members, we have found that the electric cooperatives in the states are struggling, much like we are, to make that transition into the alternative energy world because they depend on the fossil generation still. And lastly, I'll not to leave it as a foresight, but is the access to the startup capital. For worker cooperatives, it is very difficult, but yet, we have some very aggressive goals that we want to achieve. So let's go into the next slide, Michael, and let's get into the topic. That just to give you an idea of how complex this regulatory process can be. And there are many other elements of this regulatory process that are not mentioned or that are not pictured here. As an example of how we're going from our conception to the actual inception as a workers' cooperative in energy, it has taken us, it's a road that has been fraught with many demands and requirements from the regulators. We have been going at this for over 18 months. We're still pending and we're waiting for the certification as an electric co-op. We hope to get that within the next weeks or so that we can begin the process of operations. In the meantime, having to meet all of the requirements and having to anticipate some of the expected outcomes that the government wants is what keeps us busy. Right now we're also challenged not only on the regulatory side, but in the actual rollout of the new joint venture that has taken over for the monopoly that you've heard both Senator Batia, Senator Ramon Luis Lieves, and Jaime Cuevas allude to, the Puerto Rico Power Authority that has been taken away or has been depowered in many ways. They responsibilities for the transmission, the distribution, and the servicing have been given over to a joint venture. So it is a very complex environment, and beyond the environment for us, we also have to look at the environment for the US. Let's go on to the next slide. So as we look at the possibilities, the business opportunities, as I mentioned, generation, transmission, distribution, and servicing, this is what we look at. In terms of operations, some of the actions and strategies that are driving us in the energy resilience side, the ER, we're looking at, working cooperatively with the moguls or with the established entities like, the Rocky Mountain Institute that have been at this for a very long time to assess and see how we can create some of the solutions at least for the critical facilities in Puerto Rico, so that when the next disaster strikes, not is if, it's when the next disaster strikes, these critical facilities will be standing and will be able to service the needs of the population. So that's one critical area, is looking at how we enter into the power generation side. For a cooperative, and particularly a workers' cooperative, it is very challenging because we do not have the capital to build all of these farms, the PV photovoltaic farms. So in lieu of that, and I'll address it in a minute, we're looking at alternatives where we can justify to the regulators how we can become, or how it is that we're becoming an electric generator. The other opportunity in this very convoluted power industry in Puerto Rico currently is the group purchasing organization, or the wholesale distribution, and that we've looked to get some guidance on cooperatives in the states that do wholesale purchases. Just to give you facts, the federal government through FEMA alone has assigned over $2 billion for the rehab and restoration of all of the power lines. That means $2 billion, and 80% of that is going to go into material purchases. That would be an opportunity for a cooperative, as a GPO cooperative, to step in and be able to provide what the joint venture manager of the transmission distribution in Puerto Rico, as well as the power company, require. The promotion of electrolineras. Electrolineras is a new term that is being coined to change gas stations for electricity stations. That's where we're hedging our bets, and we're in the process of installing several of these dispensers for electric vehicles. That makes us then the generators of electricity, or at least the purveyors of electricity, and that's a justification for the regulators. There are a lot of opportunities on research. This is a topic that's highly researched in the States, not as much in Puerto Rico, as we're beginning to roll this out. It's an emergent industry. And on the waste management side, opportunities for us are in the recycling of the batteries, as well as all of the goods that are used in the installations of photovoltaic systems. As a result of Maria, there were over 2,000 photovoltaic cells that were destroyed. They're sitting in warehouses for many of the purveyors who don't know, or the installers who don't know what to do with them and how to dispense. So we see that an opportunity. In terms of finances, we know that co-ops, because of the assets that they have and the ability to pool the money, can finance many of the commercial installations if we are smart about how we do business. And the SBA floods us with a lot of the statistics in terms of what really keeps America ticking in terms of economic growth and development. It is the small business, and that's where we're aiming to concentrate a lot of our efforts in. On the energy resilience, then also we're looking at other products that supply some of the demands from this emerging industry, as in the insurance. We're looking also at some parametric products that could be made available to larger populations, not just those that do the very expensive installations in their homes or their businesses. And of course, in the waste management, we're looking at the options for brownfields. Much of that obviously would have to come from the grants that the federal government provides to local jurisdictions. Next slide, please. I want to make sure that we move along in here. So what are our strategies? Of course, the legislative has been addressed amply by Senator Ramon Luis Nieves. We have the US Congress that's pumping out laws, and now with the new administration, we're very hopeful that much of the resourcing that will be made available through the changes of the infrastructure in the United States will also have an impact in Puerto Rico. And we're looking at the natural resources and the deployment for Puerto Rico. The largest natural resource, although it's stated there as a Department of Natural Resources, and they don't rule it or they don't deal with it, is the sun. So for us, it's almost an infinite source of a natural resource. We're also looking at the reconstruction from Hurricane Maria. Believe it or not, 3 years into the after Maria effects, we're just beginning to see some of the construction and some of the money being transferred or being allocated for some of the major projects. And a lot of that money is going into the renewable energy sector. In the waste management, we've been looking at the resilient law centers and the NGO networks that exist to see how we can pull together the community as a whole to support all of these efforts. Technology is also a big area for us in terms of the arbitrage and the opportunities that we see. We have begun to produce, white papers on what a smart island should be. This isn't only about energy. It also has to be about broadband and communication. And we see the need for, in the photovoltaic area and the alternative energy sector, the need for the communications, the constant monitoring. So if we're going to be able to monetize the renewable energy credits, and if we're also going to be able to set up a market to sell the ITCs, the investment tax credits from all of the installations, we need and depend on that communication. The other area that is now fast approaching some interesting levels in Puerto Rico is the refurbishing of hybrid cars. Hybrid cars have been around for some time, for more than a decade, and those batteries don't necessarily have to end up in a dump site. Those batteries can be refurbished, and we're looking at the options to make those batteries like new again without adding to our waste management problems. As far as, and this is the tie-in to all of the work that that you guys are doing, the ACE, and as educators, not only in the areas that I've touched, that we continue to educate people, because a well-educated consumer is one of the better customers, as one of the stores used to say when I lived in Washington, D.C. But here we need to draw down into the decarbonization aspects of this. And here's a big element. We all are very aware of climate change for Puerto Rico. That translates into the rise of the sea level. We are expecting a rise of 8 to 10 feet in the next 50 years. That, as you can imagine, will impact a lot of the economic activity of the island, because we depend on tourism. And where are the tourist facilities? They're located in the shorelines that are going to be affected by these sea level rise. So we need to begin to educate heavily to begin to reduce the levels of carbon that are causing all of these very hot temperatures. And the recycling of the PV materials, as I mentioned, also is a big element of education. Let's go on to the last slide. And with this, I'll end up with the presentation. What we envision is for Puerto Rico in 30 years as a vibrant future if we go about this development and this transition to alternative energy. One of the elements of this is that it allows people to be self-sustaining. In my home, for instance, I was able to get rid of a $300 a month electric bill. Now I pay $4 just because I'm tied in or hooked into the power company and I receive the billings from them. But imagine $4 on a monthly basis. You can't, and I'm producing my own energy. So that makes us economically strong as consumers, and it makes the place a very desirable place for us to raise our families, work, and retire. So if we're able to reach the 100% renewable energy goals that you heard Senator Batia state that are in the law, we'll be able to knock down a lot of the carbon emissions. We'll have better agriculture and better building policies, and we'll have a better Puerto Rico as a result of that. So with that, I'll yield the floor.
Thanks, Gilberto. That was great. And really inspiring, as one of our commenters noted. I wanted to open this up for questions. We have about 20 minutes for questions for any of the panelists, Jaime, Gilberto, or Ramon. And I know we don't have a huge number of attendees, but I also know they're not shy. So I'll call on folks. Jessica, do you have a question? Saw you light up for a second. Okay, maybe not. Anybody have a question for our panelists, Gary or Margaret?
Yes, this is Margaret. There still is infrastructure, damaged infrastructure on the island. Do the co-ops have legal rights to access some of that existing infrastructure, or is it not usable?
I'll answer from the perspective of the co-ops and what we've looked at, as an opportunity, an arbitrage opportunity. That infrastructure is owned by the government, as it's been stated, by the monopoly, and it hasn't been until recently. And right now, the Bureau of Energy is looking at the wheeling regulations. We finally have the opportunity to say, oh, I can sell the energy that I produce to someone 20 miles down the road. And all of that involves the usage of the transmission lines. The transmission lines will continue to be the ownership of the government. How much we get charged for it, and in some cases, take the case of Macao, Palmas del Mar, they're trying to negotiate the transition, the turnover of all of the the electric power lines, the transmission and the distribution lines over to an electric cooperative. Whether that is going to be achievable or not, we're looking at it. This is evolving. I don't know if Ramon Luis has any other comments in terms of the who owns the infrastructure and how much bid we can have as a cooperative to own it, own some of it.
Well, actually, as you were saying, Gilberto, the infrastructure that's owned by PREPA and still owned by PREPA, it's obviously government owned. Now Luma Energy has a concession over that infrastructure. However, PREPA has, they have vacillated a little bit, but some of that infrastructure that they have a right to, that they own, such as the hydroelectric dams, right now there are open RFPs, requests for proposals, regarding several hydroelectric infrastructure in Puerto Rico. Sadly enough, although there was interest, including the Cooperativa Hidroeléctrica La Montaña, PREPA stopped without notifying nobody, because that's their style, that they were going to stop a little bit the process, but they are able to do it, and they were able to do it. So legally, they can divest themselves from some of the infrastructure. However, it will be interesting if co-ops and the co-ops that are being organized right now are going to build their own installations, although they are distributed generation installations. So that's the fact right now. That's the case.
If I can contribute something, when the new Política of Energy of Puerto Rico, la nueva política energética de Puerto Rico was established, one of the things that we move hardly and strongly is that any privatization or concession of the electric system cannot prohibit the creation of electric co-op. Eduardo Batia and Senator Larry Serhammer from both different parties was a unanimous decision, and electric co-ops cannot be stopped by the privatization or the concession. Even the 239 law, the general law for cooperative in Puerto Rico, that the electric cooperative law is a new chapter inside of the law. The cooperative have an advantage. If the government have a property, or they have to go in RSP for any service or product or property to be rented, sale, or whatever, the section 23.3 of the 239 law of cooperative in Puerto Rico established that if a co-op present a non-request proposal, the government have to answer that proposal from the co-op, and even they can pass that act, that asset to the co-op for $1 or for donation to a co-op, or they can pass the use of that property, but they can return the title of the property. And that have not been tested yet, but the law says right there. And one of the strategy that we are developing is, okay, this property or this asset is from the government. We're gonna take advantage of that section of the law of the cooperative in Puerto Rico, and we want to present a non-request proposal, even when, ¿cómo se dice subasta en inglés? RFP? No.
Action.
Auction.
Action.
Auction.
When the law require an auction for selling or pass that property, the cooperative law says when there is a requirement of that, the co-op doesn't have to pass through. They don't have to go through the auction. They have direct access directly, because it's a interest of the public to develop co-ops in Puerto Rico. And that is embedded in the law much before than the electric co-op law was created. But the advantage to have the electric co-op law as an addendum, one each chapter in that diverse type co-op law, all the other conditions of that law apply to electric co-op also. And we try to get advantage on that. Like a rent co-op, they can, like I say, in a municipality, say, we want to put a charging station for electric cars in the public road. We can access that, we can present a proposal, and the government have to hire and listen to us and make a negotiation with us, because it's embedded in the law.
Great.
I just wanted to add quite quickly that this is one example of how our experience in Puerto Rico with telecom may apply with the transformation of the energy sector. Obviously, telecommunications and energy are quite different technologies, and there are other policies, but there's a shared history there, which is very interesting. And in Puerto Rico, when in 1996, there was a federal law that promoted the privatization of telecommunications. In Puerto Rico, we started that process, and the Telefonica, which was the Puerto Rico telephone company, was privatized in 1998. But there were great controversies with private telecommunications companies, and what happened was that those companies started a process of filing complaints and lawsuits in state federal courts, and that's how they really opened the current energy telecom market that we have. So I see sections of our energy policy as the ones discussed by Jaime, as the monopoly will not go gentle into the night. So we will have to take the monopoly to court, call it PREPA, call it LUMA, whatever, to make sure that the energy policy is complied with. I look forward to those fights.
Okay. Looks like Michael has a question. Michael?
Yeah, I'm up here in Canada where we, electric cooperatives are not really a thing. The majority of our electricity is either completely privatized through sole proprietorships, or we have, provincial monopolies for electricity. And I just wanted to know, like, how is the price determined? Is that still under PREPA? Is that determined by that agency? Is that now a market price? How does the determination of the price work?
PREPA, before 2014, PREPA decided behind closed doors the rate, and they created something that even if you had 5 PhDs, you wouldn't be able to understand how PREPA created the rates. It was a quite corrupt and non-transparent process. In 2014, we created the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau, who has the sole power to entertain rate increases or decreases, or as proposed by PREPA. They have to PREPA or Luma or even private energy companies that are allowed, that could be allowed to charge for rates or for electricity, have to submit rate cases before the regulator. So we have a regulated situation. So our rates are regulated in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. It's familiar in the US context, probably not in the Canadian context. But thank you. I had a question.
I think
Do you need
Gilberto
more?
had something he wanted to add.
Oh, okay. Gilberto, you're on mute. You're on mute, Gilberto. We can't hear you.
The cost to generate that electricity is basically where that rate ought to come from. So if it's fossils, the cost of fossils, the cost of the running and operating all of the infrastructure, plus the overhead that you want to charge to that. What we're finding and what we're tiptoeing through the tulips right now is with alternative energy. So what is the cost, of the source of the electricity, which is the sun? How do you put a price on it? So right now we're working with different formulas to see, if it's capex, if it's return on investment, to provide to the regulator, to the bureau, a reasonable rate. But obviously, it's going to be way below what the PREPA has accustomed us to pay.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, Gilberto. Sort of two parts. So you're a worker co-op. So I'm curious, how many workers are in the worker co-op right now, and what's envisioned as you ramp up? And then also, like, how are you financing the co-op? Is it just through the worker co-op contributions? Are there other funders? How is that happening?
Yeah, currently we are 6, all coming from different fields. We have Jaime, who comes in from the marketing and sales. We have a PhD in finance, who's also an electric engineer. We have a representative that sells insurance, and myself, in the international commerce. We hope and we are intending to grow that membership as we get certified. The problem right now, as I mentioned, is the funding. So right now it's all our skin in the game. It's been our intensive labor that is funding the cooperative and our own private funds that are getting this cooperative. Our aim is, once we have the certification, then we're going to launch an appeal very quickly to create a green fund. We are in conversations with Bank Co-op, through Jaime, to see how we can begin to finagle, the creation of this fund. We also want to have our own PPA, the purchase power agreements right now that, the major provider of that is Sonova. And it hurts me to know that, all of that money leaves the island. There's no deposit left in the island for us to do economic development. We want to keep that money on island. So we need to create that capital base. So until we have that certification, we're going to continue to work feverishly in getting what we need in order and in place so that we can launch that fund appeal and manage that. Our cooperative is mainly aimed at, and we are marketing ourselves as the providers of finance. We are intermediaries of the financing that a lot of the installers and a lot of the APCs are requiring at this point in time, which is a major headache for them.
Great, thanks.
If I want to contribute to that question, to that answer. Also in Puerto Rico, we have FIDECOP, the Fund or Investment for Developing New Co-ops. That's that all co-ops in Puerto Rico have to contribute 7% of their net income to this fund to help new creation of co-ops. And right now they have close to $40 million of capital that they can give low rate loans to new co-ops like us. But like we say we have a project of $2 million, but we have to come up with the 20%. And that means $400,000. And we don't have that. And we try to find other ways to capitalize our cooperative to be able to create those, because FIDECOP gives us like a 2% interest rate, but we have to come up with the 20%. In some cases, and other cases, depending on the project, we have to put 45% of the capital. And that's a key important issue. But with the liquidity that the credit unions have in Puerto Rico, with the new deposits from CDFI funds that the credit unions are getting, and with the liquidity of the co-op bank of Puerto Rico, we think we can create an incredible, good green fund. But also as a workers co-op, we have some advantage if investor want to invest in our co-op capital investment, we can have it and they can have a tax exemption in their income from the interest they get from us because it's a workers co-op. And we try to combine all those opportunities and provision in the law, in different laws, to facilitate the capital that we need.
That's amazing. $40 million co-op fund. I think the USDA RCGG program nationally is 7 million. So, you know, and of course, Puerto Rico has a slightly smaller population than the US
5.8.
mainland. 5.8, sorry. It used to be 7
Small.
million. It's gone down. Yeah, that's fantastic.
But also agriculture department have special loans and grants for electric co-ops that we want to apply for.
Yeah.
And in Puerto Rico, they're very enthusiastic with the development of electric co-op in Puerto Rico because the director of rural development said, we didn't create any electric co-op in 40 years in the state. This is new for us, and they're very enthusiastic to help us in the process. But also, it's a proposal that have to be developed with the knowledge like Gilberto and other people have. But it's a steep hill to climb on. But we have to do it. It's the only way.
Great. Last call for questions. We're almost at time.
Steve, if I may just quite quickly, as part of Puerto Rico's new energy policy, that's Act 17 of 2019, there is a section of the law that orders the creation of a green energy trust. The members of the trust have already been, the trust has already been created. The government is in the process of naming the members of the board, but the purpose of that green energy trust is, once it has the money, has the corpus of the trust to support electric co-ops, microgrid systems in communities, mostly directed to low to moderate income communities. So there's going to, I suspect that in the next few years, and I hope the people who want to organize electric co-ops have different alternatives on how to finance the project. So that will be quite interesting.
Great. Well, I think this has been an excellent panel and we're at time and I want to respect that. So I want to thank all of our panelists, Jaime Cuevas, Ramon Luis Nieves, and Gilberto Guevara. Really fascinating work you guys are doing in Puerto Rico, and hope you and your colleagues can be in Vancouver in 2022. And yeah, thanks to everyone. And I'll pass it back to Michael in case there's any last bookkeeping things that need to be done.
No, that's it. And this, concludes our ACE Institute. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We hope you thought that this was an educational and beneficial conference. We do regret the fact that it needs to be virtual again this year, but we really do hope that next year we can once again convene in person and finally have our Vancouver Institute that was supposed to take place in 2020. I know the mountains are calling me for sure, but I would just like to thank Gilberto, Jaime. You were phenomenal today. I really appreciated the information that you brought to the table, as well as Raul. And with that, I'd just like to thank our sponsors, the Ralph K. Morris Foundation, Shared Capital Cooperative, and the Minnesota Farmers Union for making this conference possible. And with that, I wish you a good rest of your Thursday afternoon. Take care, everyone.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.